Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Dandelion Dynasty Book 3, The Veiled Throne, Chapter 40 and 41. In these chapters, we get some information about what's going on with Gia and her plans and what she knows versus what she doesn't. But mostly the thing that we're getting is more restaurant wars, and y'all know I am okay with that. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Kyle for commissioning this episode. Oh, Kyle is here in the chat. Hello, Kyle. He says, hey, can't stay long, but just wanted to say how much I enjoy your coverage of the book. Oh, yay. Thank you, Kyle. I'm very glad. Yeah, this book has been super fun. And like I said before, it has been really nice to have a bit of a respite from how just desperate things are. It's a smart setup. You know, stepping back to sort of think about the way Ken Liu decided to like have some really horrific stuff. And then he sandwiched in this plot, which I think actually has higher stakes than it looks like, but feels a lot lower in stakes compared to most of the plot. It's a smart move to break it up and give us a little bit of a fucking breather. Forgive me if you guys can hear things in the background. I have a puppy in the office with me. And he's not too terrible as far as puppies go, but he does like to get into stuff. And right now he's got a hold of a box that used to have some Christmas lights in it and is really going to town. So I'm just going to have to try and ignore him, and I hope that y'all can also ignore him. So Chapter 40, this is really something. And Chapter 40 begins with a letter to Gia from Gory Ruthie. And he is out with Princess Aya, who, reminder, is the daughter of General Ginmazotti, and is telling the tale of the most, he is telling a tale of a confrontation with some pirates and the way that the princess decided to handle it. And it's a really fascinating story because the way he tells it and the way that Gia chooses to interpret it are very much at odds. And I really respected her assessment of the tone he would choose to take regardless of what actually happened, really. And basically interpreting everything he says with a grain of salt. And I just felt like I would not have seen through that. And granted, I am not as familiar with this guy's personality and taking that into account. But the way that this initial sort of report goes is basically that Aya is, and this is from his perspective and the way he's sort of presenting it. He is basically saying that Aya doesn't take any advice from anybody else, that she sort of rides her mother's coattails in as far as constantly quoting things that her mother has written or referencing things that her mother has done in defense of the choices she herself is making. And she is also misinterpreting a lot of what her mother wrote, according to him, and saying that she is taking the wrong lesson from certain things. And when he tries to correct her interpretation of them, she kind of flares up at him and says that if he never won a battle himself, or if he never had a conversation with her mother about the specific passage that she's referencing, that he can't countermand what she claims it actually meant, and essentially just keeps telling him to mind his own business and sit down and let her do her job. Oh, he's going a little bit nuts. Sorry, guys. Apologies, Kyle. But all of this to say that when things go wrong, he has written it in such a way that she will have just finished saying how, see, I know what I'm doing. And as she's finishing her sentence, something will go very wrong. So he's really playing up her incompetence in a way that feels downright theatrical. And like, it's one thing if I were reading this from, like, written by Ken Liu in a way that's just a narrative description of a scene. But it didn't occur to me that the fact that I'm reading this from the perspective of somebody who has decided that he is not going to take her seriously means that, yeah, he's going to formulate the scene to make her look as ridiculous as he can. So what Gia comes away with is that, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit to the spot where she is like talking about how this girl actually did better. Like, Gia comes down on, this girl did well considering. Here it is. The princess was no military genius, but that didn't make her useless. Despite all of Gory Ruthy's attempts to slant the narrative, Gia could discern the truth between the lines. Yes, Aya was insecure and burdened with the weight of her lineage. But even so, she cared about the lives of the people she was charged with leading. Despite multiple errors, no one had died under her command. Her first instinct wasn't to gain herself the great glory of capturing pirates, but to rescue the survivors of the pirate raid on the wrecked ship. Certainly, Gory Ruthy neglected to mention the precautions she must have taken so that the booby trap didn't kill anyone. All in all, she was rather satisfied with the young woman's performance. And I was really just gratified by this, because this is a big part of dealing with people. And anybody who's even been in like middle management knows this. When you are going to be taking folks on their word about how something happened, you have got to take into account the ways in which that person is going to see things or misrepresent things. And I say see things or misrepresent because I think a lot of people don't go into stuff intending to misrepresent. I think we all have our own way of seeing the world based on our experiences. And we are going to come away from the same conversation as someone else feeling like it went distinctly differently. You know, like I am somebody who I can tend to be very, very direct. And if I'm dealing with somebody who is much more passive, they will often take me as having been much, much more aggressive than I intended to come across. Or I will be with somebody who is more passive and we're both dealing with somebody who's more aggressive and direct like I am. And I will feel like, oh, that was a good conversation. I really get it. And the other person will be like, they were extremely rude and like belittling in a way that I genuinely didn't take it. And now I start to wonder, did they mean to be belittling and I just missed it because I don't see that? Or did they like, or did the other person take it as belittling and it wasn't intended that way? So anyway, I just liked this because, you know, again, I don't know Gory Ruthy's like MO very well. And I like seeing Gia be able to like pick through all of this fucking language because he really tells this story in such detail. And that's what you need to be able to do, you know, if you're going to run things. And there's this moment here as well. P.S. I've just been informed that One-Eyed Shark has sent us the ransom demand for his hostages. As I noted in my last letter, there is no evidence that any of the pirates of Amu Strait are working with the Liuku, or that any abductions are for more than ransom. I recommend we pay the ransom to ensure the safe return of the merchantman's crew. It will be cheaper and more effective than sending Princess Aya again. So, then we have a letter from Farah to Aya. And Farah is just, what a doll. Like, I think she's being overly kind and maybe, I can't, shh, be careful, baby. He's so quiet so much of the time, and then he'll just burst out. I think that the thing that I'm having trouble with is how much of the supportive sweetness in this letter is genuinely Farah not seeing that Aya is a little incompetent. And I don't mean as incompetent, obviously, as Ruthie was trying to make her out to be, but she's certainly not great. How much of it can Farah see, and how much of it is her just being a really good friend and cheerleading her? Because I hope that it's mostly the second. I want to believe that Farah can tell when somebody has some real shortcomings and they need to like improve, but knows that it's more important to be positive and just cheer them on, you know? And I love it just, and like the first two paragraphs referencing what's going on there, remember that I believe in you. And she is talking about Granny Wasu and all of this amazing food. And I love this. I'm sure Aunt Mother will be happy to hear I've taken an interest in the domestic arts of cooking, hostessing, and herb gardening. So if you're going to write her a report about what's happening with me, mention that. I can already see your skeptical look. So suspicious. I swear every word I've written is true. Look how neat my logograms are. Anyway, I hope you finish your anti-piracy mission soon and come home. I may or may not, you'll have to remain in suspense, have some good gossip to share. And then she asks, have you ever thought about designing restaurant furniture? Which I was like, that's interesting because, like, you know, we know that it doesn't seem like Aya's passion is battle. She's doing it, but it feels much more like an obligation because of her lineage. I'm wondering about this for her. And then, one last thing. When you're on your way back, would you mind swinging by the silkworm eggs? I have reliable information that there is a group of pirates holding hostages at the private shipyard of the Huto clan in those isles. And this is one of those moments where I'm like, I can't decide if this is really smart of Farah or really stupid. Because she could be putting everything at risk, but also this is somebody who is like very high up the food chain that she is sending to deal with the Huto clan. And I feel like maybe that's going to be necessary and might uncover quite a lot. And if it is like, if it works out and Aya handles it well, this could look extremely good for her. So I don't know. I think maybe it might wind up being a good idea, but not necessarily because Farah thought through all of the consequences and more because of luck. But we shall see. And then we have a letter from Firo to Zomi. And he is talking about Ofluro and Lady Suka and how they have just been absolutely invaluable with learning more about dealing with the Garinnafins. For the first time, I really do believe we can build up a Garinnafin force to challenge the Liuku. The next time we meet on the battlefield, we'll be able to send up Garinnafin riders of our own. And that brings me to the purpose of my letter. As you know, without money, Garinnafins alone cannot change the tides of war. And he is determined to get more funding. And obviously, Gia has not really changed her position at all on, you know, the attacks that he wants to mount and everything. The Inner Council and the Empress act like toddlers who believe that when they cover their eyes, the world disappears. And again, I can understand in a way why he feels this, but we just know that's absolutely not the case at all. And it's so difficult to hear someone so young and inexperienced and, you know, like we saw that whole like moment play out in front of him in the council chamber where somebody was like playing things to his advantage and he just didn't understand that was what was happening and it was happening in front of his eyes. He doesn't have the perception needed to get what's going on here. I don't want to just defend the core islands. I want to take back Rui and Dasu. And can you find a way to secure me the funding by other means? I also need men and women of talent. A war isn't fought only by soldiers. I need you to help me bring together a second team to repeat the miracle of Zathan Gulf, composed of skilled engineers who can build new weapons for a new war. I know that to privately fund an army, when the Empress has denied public funding, verges on treason. Yet, does not Mutaje require more than obedience to the holder of the seal of Dara? When the islands are under the threat of annihilation, is it treason to try to save the people using whatever means one has? And it's unclear to me whether or not Gia sees this particular letter, because, like, I imagine that Gia pretty much gets a look at all of the, like, papers that go in and out of the palace, whether they are supposed to be shown to her or not. So then we have her talking to Shay and Shido. And I think these are the two girls that we had Gia like dreaming about at the beginning of this book. But these are, I think, the flowers that are used for her drug, if I'm not mistaken. And the plant like flowers in the winter, and in order to get the yield that she wanted, she had tried a second planting during a time of year that could maybe mimic the weather of winter, but she's realizing that the sunlight and stuff is going to be different, so it doesn't give as good a yield as she was hoping. And Gia says, don't ask the other Dyran Finns to climb higher. It won't do any good, and sustained exposure to such frigid conditions will damage their joints. Actually, get them all back here. They've lived in the cold for too long as it is. I'll make them a homunculus mushroom soup to heal their bodies. I'll think of another way to grow them in summer and autumn. And I am really, like, it's just so interesting to me to see how compassionate Gia can be in moments like this, where she's like, no, I don't want these people to be like suffering, and I will give them medicine. But then, you know, we've seen her just be like, oh yeah, all of the people who made those mirrors in the last book, they all need to be killed. And it's just wild how she can go from like so deeply compassionate to so ruthless. I find it really, it just makes her a real person to me, you know? Because we are like that, aren't we? We have weird places where we decide to draw the lines for ourselves. So, let's see. It would be easier if she had a partner with whom she could discuss her ideas to help her think, but this had to be her task alone. So then she goes to the petitions. There was a petition from Prince Gimoto. She broke the seal, unfolded it, but didn't bother reading the contents before dripping a clump of wax at the end and carving denied, and she tossed it to the side. And I was like, well, damn, that is cold-blooded. There was a petition from Firo, and he's asking for funding to build a temple to Ginmazoti. And she's like, oh, I see what you're doing. You want everybody to like remember the battles and remember what they've been through, and to draw a lot of focus to the fact that we're still in the middle of this and get everybody all riled up so that they want war as well. No. And then Gory Ruthie, like most letters from moralists, it was prolix and tedious. I just realized that I don't know what prolix means. Let's see what the dictionary of the Kindle wants to say. Oh, God, the dictionary isn't even downloaded for this Kindle. Oh, here it is. Adjective of speech or writing, using or containing too many words, tediously lengthy. I love the example they've got. He found the narrative too prolix and discursive. Nice. I never heard that word before. Well, I enjoy learning new words, and I hope I actually remember this one. So let's see. The second was the point about no evidence of pirate abductions. Tom Vanaki could not be underestimated. She had to figure out what was going on, not because the Liuku must not be allowed to steal Dara's people and knowledge, but also because the answer could be the solution to another problem that had been plaguing her. And I'm very curious what that is, because what is she doing? Just, Gia, Gia, you're too much for me, girl. So, chapter 41, A Curse. The 6th month in the 9th year of the reign of season of storms and the reign of audacious freedom. 23 months until the reopening of the wall of storms. And the Splendid Urn has been the target of one, I hesitate to use the word prank because that is sort of meant to be more good-natured and harmless ultimately. I guess sabotage really is the word I want. It has been the target of like several acts of sabotage over the past week. And it is really awful to read this because I feel like, and this is, it's so hard to say for sure, but this is the sort of thing where it feels to me incredibly obvious what is going on. And I understand that people are extremely superstitious and that there are going to be folks out there who are swayed, but it really does feel like what Hutto is doing works exceptionally well. And I feel like this is one of the first times in these books in a while that I have a hard time really believing that nobody sees what's going on here. Because Hutto is so transparently a piece of shit. And I don't know if like his reputation as a businessman is much more secret than I'm realizing. I'm assuming that has to be it. And evidently his little like attempt to get the Splendid Urn to comp him all of his meals with no consequences and everything, I guess they never shared what happened with anybody. And like, who would they share it with? How would that get out? I don't know. But it just troubles me that even in this chapter, when he's literally on the scene, when one of these things happens, it doesn't seem that anybody believes he is behind what's happening. I just really, nobody, like the only people that seem to maybe have any idea are the ones who are loyal customers and wind up eating their, like, as part of the competition later on and throw back some insults to the people who are hired to sort of picket outside and make terrible claims about the restaurant. And those people don't even like, they exchange insults, but they don't ever really accuse him flat out of cheating. So it just feels like nobody is seeing through this. And except for obviously the actual staff of the Splendid Urn. And I have a really hard time with the fact that nobody is putting two and two together. Even those who were at the Splendid Urn on the day that Hutto decided he was going to, you know, throw a very public fit about his food being bad. I wish that they would engage, and by they I mean the Splendid Urn, in the same like guerrilla warfare as him, at least in terms of going out into the street and circulating that he tried to like sabotage their restaurant as a customer before the competition even began. Because if they put that out there, I feel like folks would already have a better idea of like the means he will stoop to in order to get what he wants. And it's just very frustrating because, like I said, this is so effective, evidently. And it just seems incredibly obvious to me in a way that I know even those like people who were very superstitious, people who are superstitious are also just like suspicious in general, and being convinced that it's like a business doing things isn't that big a jump or leap if people decided that they could, if we had folks out there circulating this information And I guess it's just supposed to be that the Splendid Urn is not going to, they aren't going to lower themselves to the same sorts of tactics that he is. But in my opinion, the tactics that Hutto is employing of paying people to circulate lies about what happened with the, the fact that they decided to basically concede the last section of the competition, that is not the same thing as having folks going out and telling the exact truth about something that happened. You're not out here creating false gossip. You are sharing the truth about somebody who is dishonest and attempting not only to shut you down simply for their own profit and pride, but they have killed and are holding hostage and blackmailing somebody in order to win. And that is a whole other level of everything. So there comes a point where for me, that is not, the gloves are off. There is no place within what he has chosen to do that causes me any loss of sleep over doing even something that is underhanded. And I don't think that they would have to resort to anything actually underhanded, because what he has actually done is bad enough. And I know that they talk about like, oh, there's no proof and we can't take him to a magistrate. No, you can't. But you can certainly put out in the public the idea of what it is he's up to, and at least let people draw their own conclusions. And that way the public, who are frankly more important in this case than a magistrate, what the public believes is going on is the thing that actually matters. I just feel like they're not being smart about the way they're handling this. And I am going to need all of them to step it up a little bit, because they have been extremely clever and creative most of the time. But then this series of sabotages feels like almost cartoonish, and they are handling it in exactly the way he wants them to handle it, which is to say, they're not handling it. They're acting like, well, there's nothing we can do. Maybe there's not a way to combat the specific sabotages that he sets up in the moment. A bunch of like wild dogs stand outside and bark and shit everywhere. Okay, maybe there's nothing to be done with that in the moment. But you could begin circulating that, oh yeah, all of those dogs belong to him. It's so weird. We saw them in his yard. Not exactly that. I'm just saying, like, for instance, there are ways to deal with things like this. And I just feel like it's weird that we're acting like the gossip mill of the city itself is not also at their disposal the way it is at his disposal. He is making use of it, and they're behaving as if they don't want to like lower themselves. And this is where I get so irritated, y'all, because this is how I feel about politics a lot of the time too. The whole like they go low, we go high thing. I mean, it's one thing to be like, I am not going to resort to the same like damaging rhetoric or anything that actually harms communities that are already marginalized, sure. But there's also just playing the rules smart and like exploiting certain loopholes in a way that is intelligent and thoughtful. And there's this puritanical attitude about a lot of people, especially liberals, regarding how politics should be played if you want to keep the veneer of like respectability up. And I just cannot be fucking bothered with that anymore. Respectability no longer matters. And despite, even if it did matter, you can play a little bit dirtier and still have the respectability thing. And sure, the opposition is going to cry and scream about how you're doing something underhanded. And you know what? Oh, well, because that's just something that you then have to put up with, is that they are going to throw a fit no matter what you do. So at least be fucking effective. Just, there's a point at which holding yourself to a higher standard can be taken to a point that is sanctimonious and just so ineffective as to be simply like to stroke your own ego about how you're a better person, and not actually dealing with the results and consequences of handling something that way. Do you get what I'm saying? So all in all, I found this chapter very frustrating to read because it felt like there were so many options that they could have taken, and they don't choose any of them and constantly act like they're just running around flailing their hands like, oh God, what are we going to do? And it's like, there are a million things y'all could be doing. And you're just, even the fact that, well, I'm getting a little ahead of myself here, but we start off this with the huge parasol tree. And there is a bunch of caterpillars that are like dropped onto the tree, and I guess are going to just like eat it down to the bare branches and stuff until they have cut all of the branches off to get rid of the caterpillars. She tried to brush it away, but it ended up on her arm. Wherever it touched, she felt as if she had been pricked, and then a burning sensation spread across the skin. Hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of caterpillars dangled on silk strands from the parasol tree. The entire tree was covered in a gauzy gossamer cocoon. And this is one of those, like, again, everybody's acting like, oh, it's a curse. You don't think that it's weird all of them are on this one tree? Like, it's just everybody's so prepared to believe this curse, instead of that probably a guy who is extremely rich and has a ton of resources was able to buy a bunch of caterpillars and have this done. And the fact that they give you rashes truly is just so very unfair. And let's see, this is when Widow Wasu is talking. Fucking Mati tries to say something about how, like, oh, maybe all the bad things that have been happening are just coincidences. And I lost a lot of respect from Mati at that, even though, like, even when she says it, she does not sound like she believes it. The fact that she even attempted to say that, I was like, girl, what are you doing? Let's see. The day before yesterday, 2 vegetable vendors' carts had their axles break just as they turned the corner for our delivery door. Yesterday, a pack of feral dogs just happened to surround the restaurant. And I love when they're like, do you think it's Tifan Hutto? And she's like, of course it's fucking Tifan Hutto. So, and Mati says, but what does he hope to accomplish? Sure, he's disturbing our customers, but that's not going to help him win. And I'm like, it doesn't really matter about, like, it's weird that they're asking, what does he hope to accomplish? If he undermines your confidence enough and makes you panicky enough, that's a big advantage. You know, it was weird to me to even ask the question. To me, it's just all about whether or not he wins the competition. If he's made it so that people don't want to eat there even after the competition is over, he can actually shut y'all down, which is what we see we're leading to a little bit later. So they are thinking about, like, the fact that they all have this competition for service coming up, and they're going to be, the way that each restaurant is competing is they have to make identical dishes, and they are going to show off their staff and the way that they choose to present everything and handle their customers and yada, yada, yada. And we get some information here about how the hiring process goes, and that the Splendid Urn is a very coveted position because they are paid well. Widow Wasu is like willing to loan former employees money to start their own businesses and stuff. And they also get like bonuses on holidays, all of the kinds of things that like we wish were still things today. And the treasure chest was working with a green crew who hadn't been together long enough to develop trust and routine, and Tifon Hutto seemed to have a reputation as an impatient manager who liked to meddle in things he didn't understand. The soft opening of the treasure chest a few weeks earlier, a sort of trial run for the competition, had been a disaster. The place had been filled with curious diners who wanted to sample the amazing dishes that had defeated the Splendid Urn at the first round of the competition, but Mozo's kitchen couldn't keep up, and the waitstaff, many of them hired because they asked for the lowest salaries, was unfamiliar with the complicated menu and got many orders wrong. An enraged Tifon had fired the shift manager on the spot and threw a tantrum in the middle of the restaurant, ending dinner service rather ignominiously. And it is just wild to me how on fucking point this is. I mean, it's not just food service, but honestly, food service is a particularly chaotic type of work that I think is a really good, like, example for this. But, like, first of all, the manager who doesn't know anything and insists on interfering all the time, that is the first thing that I think of whenever I'm considering how a place is like run. Do they have managers who have not worked the floor in over 5 years telling people who are on the floor every day what to do? And if so, that's a fucking no for me. If you haven't done this job in the last year, and I mean that, 1 year, you begin to forget things. You begin to forget the urgency, the routine. If you haven't done it in a year, you don't remember what it's like, and you don't have the right priorities anymore. You start to have this like really idealized concept of what a work day could look like if everything went right. And you forget how often things go wrong and how catastrophic even small things can wind up being to the rhythm of the day and result in a domino effect, which causes fucking a million other things to get backed up and fucked. And so, like, for me, that is the number one mistake that a lot of places make. And that this is food service, but also it's retail in general. If you have management who doesn't work the floor dictating how things should be done, you are making a big mistake. And then, of course, hiring people just because they'll take the lowest wages, guess what? You wind up with people who don't meet your standards because you're not placing value on the work that you allegedly want. You're saying that you want work that is like above average, but you aren't willing to pay above average. So you're going to get what you're going to get, and you better be thankful you're getting that. And then as for like no training, another big thing. I have worked for places that I wound up walking out of because they put me behind a register and didn't show me how to do anything. They had me, fulfilling orders in back, and nobody had even told me where half of the items are located to fill the order. And then I wind up getting screamed at by a sous chef, even though they should be screaming at the person who should have told me this stuff. And so this whole thing, like, it sounds just extremely familiar. That's all I'm saying. So this is when they start thinking about, like, the whole concept of the curse and that people are really beginning to believe it. And Mati says, I'll go to the Temple of Lutho right away. Maybe an exorcism will help. And Widow Wasu is like, no, we can't do that. And just as she starts to say that, people rush in and tell her that the monks are here. And I was sort of thinking initially that these weren't even going to be real monks. There's a bunch of nuns. I was sort of like, are these going to turn out to be fucking actors, that Huto hired to make it look like they're, but no, it didn't occur to me. He doesn't really have to do that. Why would he have to hire fakes? He can just tell real people to come and do an exercise, like, you know? And of course it's him that set this up. And Widow Wasu has to go to them and be like, who asked you to come here? And it's an interesting thing when these, the way that this exorcism goes, they sped up their chant. They attached the whips to the turtle's head. The tips of the thin, soft thongs went into the turtle's mouth, while the nuns held onto the handles. Then, waving the long handles like wands, the nuns quickened their chants, now sounding like war cries. As they twirled the wands about, they peered through the thick smoke in every direction, searching for evil spirits. With a loud cry, one of the nuns leapt at the parasol tree. She reached into the lapel of her robe with her left hand and sprinkled something on the trunk of the parasol tree. Then she touched the wand, still connected to the giant turtle, to the same spot. A blinding explosion lit up that part of the trunk. Through the thick incense smoke, it looked like the eruption of a tiny volcano. The crowd gasped, and some of the young children began to cry. And Dandelion's watching this and she's just like, what the fuck? And she says, I'm trying to figure out how they're doing this. And somebody behind them says, I can tell you how. And it's, Rati Yera with, Motakifi. It's very simple. That turtle is a silk modic generator. I bet if you opened it up, you'd find a spinning glass disc and silk encased rubber. The glowing eyes are probably mercury vapor lamps. As for the explosions, I imagine they're sprinkling firework powder on the remaining caterpillars, and then when they touch the wands charged with silkmodic force to the caterpillars, the sparks set off an explosion. These nuns and I are basically in the same profession. Temple magic is no different from street magic. That's how I would do it. And Kinri is just like, I can't believe you would compare street entertainment with religious ritual. And she says, whatever. And he's like, well, you're saying it's fake. And I love this. Rati says, no. Remember what Dandelion said about mind pleasure? There is a deeper meaning to ritual that goes beyond the incense and the wooden turtle and the spectacle. That part is what matters. And I really appreciated that because this is, again, something that, all of us have our different priorities as human beings. But there is a particular kind of pushback that happened with the Puritans against any sort of worship that involved decadence of any kind, and particularly like beauty, whether it be actual valuable like gold and jewels and silks or whatever, or a part of ritual that was just superfluous to speeches and hymns, was seen as like sinful and indulgent in a way that was like missing the point of worship and engaging in things for the pleasures of the flesh rather than for the glory of God. And I always found it so weird because, like, the idea that we would be given beautiful things and then the use of them would be like inherently sinful felt really strange and nonsensical. There is like, I have no problem with people who want a really ascetic approach to their worship. That's fine if that's what does it for you. But I also don't understand holding it against people who want beauty in their worship either, because beauty is part of the world and it's a way of celebrating creation, to acknowledge beauty and to acknowledge like the talent that human beings are given with, something like illuminated manuscripts or glass, like stained glass windows. That is a talent given to people by God, one would assume, and they're putting it to work to like celebrate and worship, but that is then turned around as like so excessive that it's unacceptable. But why? Why though? You know, it's like a beautiful thing that has been given and you're turning your nose up at it like you're too good for it. And like as if turning your nose up at it inherently made you like a better person than them. It's just a wild way to live. And I've always been really puzzled at the insistence some people have that unless something can be broken down to its most spare parts and used that way, that it's too fussy, you know? I mean, it's just like, oh, well, do you sleep on a 1-inch thick bare pallet on a bare floor with like a blanket? No. You need more than the bare minimum sometimes, and that's fine. There's no fault in that. So anyway, just the idea of like using ritual and stuff and saying like, I know how they do it, but that doesn't mean it hasn't got any value. That's important to me. So anyway, this is when Tifon and Wasu kind of face off, and he's like, all smiles about how he is the one who called for the exorcism. And then we find out that he was like, what he did, and this is just very clever. Mozomu is so young and so unaccustomed to the kinds of underhanded tactics that guys like Huto use, that she got tricked into asking him to do the exorcism, and thinks that she's doing the Splendid Urn a favor, when in fact he is using her as a smokescreen to hide behind and say like, oh, I did this out of the goodness of my heart because my young chef wanted an even playing field. So this was all because I'm so honest. And then she pulls out all of these steamed buns that she made and all of these dips. And it takes a little while, but everybody winds up getting sick from them. And at first I was like, oh, it was in the steamed buns. And then I was like, I don't know, poisoning the steamed buns with like this very attention focused chef who like, I would imagine knows what's going into her food would be pretty tough. And then, you know, we have Kinri who eats only the sauces. Dandelion eats only one of the pork buns or dumplings. And each of them doesn't get sick, even though they had different parts. And I was like, oh, okay, so it has to be put together. And eventually they figure it out. But it takes them longer than I expected to begin to realize what's going on. So, of course, all of the staff being lined up outside of like bathrooms that can be seen makes it look like the food is bad, like that there's something going on with the Splendid Urn itself. And when I started to say this earlier and I sort of cut myself off until I got here, everybody on the street, I thought, saw Mozumu giving them the dumplings. And I, again, feel like you could put it out there that there was something in the dumplings. Now, this is a tricky one because I don't want them to blame Mozomu because I don't think she actually did this on purpose. I am curious how they got whatever the ingredients were into the recipes without her noticing, because I have to assume they are not things that would normally be in there, or else this would happen every time. So I don't want her blamed, but I do want the connection to be made that after being given a gift from the opposing team of food, the entire staff comes down ill. I mean, hello, you know, like anybody, but nobody is talking about this. And then we have a couple days later, a bunch of the staff has just bailed on the Splendid Urn, despite this being a restaurant that most people really would want to work for. They hold their positions for a long time. There's low turnover. So everybody who is bailing must really believe something is really wrong. And they're giving out like final wages to this one girl, Panozzi, and she's making like these excuses, but they're very hollow. They all know she's made them up. My mother sent word saying my father is ill. It's all right, said Lodon. I understand. The girl bit her bottom lip, ashamed, and left. And there are only two that stay because they don't really have anything to lose at this point. And they have one cook, one busboy, and a scullery maid. Which Wasu is like taking count of exactly who is remaining and what they've got. And she's like, oh, okay. So I guess everybody who actually has a choice has decided to leave. And they like Tessun starts to be calling them cowards. And she's like, I don't blame them. Like, who the fuck knows what's going on here? And honestly, I wanted her to say, even if it isn't actually a curse, it's very clear the restaurant's being targeted by somebody who doesn't mind hurting people. So whether it's the curse and it's like some sort of supernatural situation or not, these people are in danger of something happening potentially, and also could just go on working for a restaurant that starts to lose business and they then lose their jobs anyway, or start. I don't know if tipping is a thing here. I don't get the impression because it hasn't been mentioned, but you know, if the place is empty, they're not going to get paid. So, you know, and they don't have any evidence again to go after Hutto with. And then we have her beginning to talk about shutting down. Let's spend the rest of the time settling our accounts and paying off our bills. I was the one who invited them to stay. Maybe it's a sign. We had a good run in Ginpen, but nothing lasts forever. Tessun looked devastated. We've always done the right thing and treated our customers with respect. Why? I know you've put a lot of sweat and tears into building up the urn here in Ginpen. The race goes not always to the swift. So then we go to Kinri and Dandelion, who are talking to the Blossom Gang, and they're figuring out exactly how this food poisoning was like set up. And discussing how many people they've got for the competition because they're not allowed to hire new people. The only staff they're allowed to work with are the staff that they had hired on when the competition began. And I'm realizing now, because, you know, earlier in this, somebody asks, what is it that he's trying to do? And I said, well, he's just like, even if he just undermines your confidence, that is still a big accomplishment. But obviously, this is exactly what he was hoping, was that all of their very well-trained staff who works well together and trust one another all bail. So we have this interesting thing with Kinri and Dandelion, because Kinri is saying, I wish that we could make Lodon into 20 people. And then later on, he starts thinking about that weird thing with the bird that was able to like lead its way through that maze, and begins to come up with a concept. And I'm thinking that this is going to wind up being a like I'm not really sure what to call it, but like automated service. Like all I could think of was the sort of conveyor belt meals that you can get. Like there's a Korean restaurant near me that you can get the conveyor belts going past you, and it's got all different types of food, and each of them is on a specific type of plate. So you take whatever you want off the conveyor belt as it passes, you eat it, and then the person who collects the plates from your table tracks the types of plates you've used, and that's how they account for what you've eaten and charge you. Now, I don't think that's what's going to happen here based on the type of technology that draws his attention, but I am really curious because like that's only going to be to serve the food. It is not going to be something you can use to take orders, I wouldn't think, or to correct problems and interact with customers if they have an issue with their order. So I'm really like not, I feel like this is going to work out somehow, but I feel like there's a lot of potential pitfalls in what it sounds like he's trying to do. And we also get this conversation between him and Dandelion where she is just looking kind of like she's agitated, and he gets her to talk to him about it. And he says, I chatted a bit with the parents and they told me what happened to them back home. It was horrible. I can't imagine real people, not villains from the old sagas, being so cruel. I'm going to have nightmares. Kinri said nothing. He did have nightmares still from what he had seen in Kigo-Yezu. I don't understand why the Ryuku are like that. Do they really want to kill everyone who's not Ryuku? My brother, he always says he wants to fight the Ryuku, and I think I understand how he feels now, at least a little bit. And, of course, Kinri is just devastated because he's falling in love with Dandelion, and the idea that she might just reject him based on who he is and where he's from, it's just awful for him. And he tries to be like, maybe they're not all like that. But even as he says it, he just doesn't he's stopping and being like, enough people are going along with this, though, that how can I defend it? If it would be one thing if it was just Kutan Rovo, but Kutan Rovo has a lot of supporters. How is it that I can like try and say, oh, it's not all of them, when enough of them are doing this that it's like, it's still sort of shameful, you know? And he is just really trying to square what he has learned about the people of Dara and their kindness and compassion with one another with what he knows his own people have been capable of. And it's just really difficult for him to like hold the concept that there can be good and bad with each, and that maybe he's seeing the worst of one and the best of another in his head. And I really like, this was not a society in bondage, not a people under the yoke of a tyrant. He loved Ukyata-asa, his homeland, but Dara was free. Is this what Master Nazute meant by learning from experience? He forced the thought away. That couldn't be the truth. Couldn't. He had to be wrong. He had to be missing something. He had to hold on to the possibility that Kutan Rovo and the others who agreed with her were aberrations, that they did not represent the true Ryuku spirit. Had to. And then she says, I feel really bad because on the way back, they told me that even after they leave the camp, refugees have a really hard time. Folks think that they're cowards for submitting, and because they can't get work or their businesses won't be sustained because nobody will do business with them, they then like turn to doing illegal shit, which of course makes everybody trust them even less, and they never feel at home again. And I was like, that is truly heartbreaking. That had not occurred to me, but honestly, that's awful. Still others try to find shelter at temples and shrines deep in the mountains where monks and nuns are more compassionate. So, Arona and Mota said, Granny Wasu and Uncle Tesson are very special because they took you in without any questions. And I love this. Dandelion saying, if only there were a way to turn them each into 20 people. And I really like the two of them. I really am starting to ship them. I really am. The way they talk with each other and the kinds of secrets that they're both hiding are just so similar, you know? And I love they have a conversation about Emperor Ragen. Of course, she has keeps on starting to say her father and having to cut herself off, but he didn't know where the name came from. And I don't remember if we learned this ourselves or not, but I had wondered where the name came from and I couldn't remember this being explained. But she says, most scholars say Ragan is an allusion from a passage in Confucius' treatise on moral relations, in which a robber debates the one true sage, but that's just the moralists trying to comfort themselves. He wasn't interested in making the moralists happy. Ragan is an onomatopoeia that literally means banging or ringing, and the emperor definitely intended no connection to Confucius. The emperor was young and a bit of a layabout, and his sister-in-law used to bang an empty pot when he came home to show that there was no more rice for him to eat. The emperor decided for reference that to reference that episode of his life to show that he never forgot the music of his humble origins. And Kinri is just blown away that Ragan was like a person, and that he had a sense of humor to the degree that he would use that name. Like, it's one thing to have that be like an inside joke that a couple people who are close to him call him by this. It's another thing to be like, that is my name, Emperor banging a pot. You know, like, that is a whole other thing. And it's just the whole conversation and the ways in which she is like sharing the reality of her life and the parts of Ragan that other people, regular people, wouldn't necessarily know about. It's giving Kinri a particular insight that is so valuable and that could bring the two of them together in such a specific way. I am just really excited about this. So this is, Kinri couldn't get the images of the mechanical orchestra out of his mind, because that's what starts the conversation. His mind was a jumble, and he keeps on thinking about how helpless he feels and that he is going to find a way to do this. But he is struggling deeply with continuing to keep all of these secrets. And this chapter ends with, he felt trapped inside a maze. No matter which direction he turned in, he bumped into a wall. Perhaps you'll even have a chance to see the core islands. That's what you've always wanted, isn't it? To see the strange machines you've heard so much about. The words seemed a ray of light in the darkness, a strand of hope he clung to. He followed it and saw Ratiera's maze-running cart, glowing brightly in the jumble of his doubts. And that is the end of chapter 41. So I'm pretty stoked to see how they decide to, like, because even if he does have this idea, building a bunch of things in a short time, I mean, that's going to be a lot of work. So we shall see how he pulls that off. And I am also really curious about fucking Huto. And even if he gets all of the Splendid Urn staff to quit, his own staff sucks. So how does he make up for that? Is he just hoping they do so badly that he'll have to win by default because he can at least has enough people? Like, I mean, I suppose. Or he could be poaching them, I guess. And, you know, but no, he can't, because that rule is that they have to have been hired already. I don't know. I don't know how he's going to do this. All right, I better wrap up, but thank you again very much, Kyle, for commissioning this. Appreciate you a lot. Hope y'all are enjoying the coverage. And until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.